just surviving these strange times and surviving our own personal challenges. All of us, all four of us, have faced some really daunting challenges over the last, what, 12 months, the last time we did a virtual gala. And we are particularly thankful for the recovery of Pinckney Benedict. Thank you, Pinckney, for, of course, helping all of this to happen. And we wish you increased strength and so much love to keep. Yeah, the heart is the right thing. The heart is the right thing. I also want to, she is not here, but you know her, you love her, Jude Jordan. She is an amazing force of nature. She has left her imprint on the poetry that comes out of this program. She is an amazing human being. And, you know, there's no stopping Jude Jordan. Except if you ask her to wake up at 9 a.m. and go to go to graduation. There's a line in the sand and it has been drawn, but I still wanted to recognize the contributions of Jude Jordan. She worked so hard. And also our latest and most wonderful addition, R.A. Frumkin, who is in transit right now and is not able to be with us, but in the short period they have been part of this program, they have brought energy, they have brought new insight, they have brought wit, and so many wonderful things are happening in their writing life and in their personal life that I'm just so amazed and inspired by what they bring to the table. And I also wanted to thank everyone who has helped me, because I have been, frankly, in a lot of dark spaces and a lot of dark places, and a lot of you have reached out to me during the aftermath of losing John and during the aftermath of nearly losing my eye. My eye's fine now, but you know, when you're about to teach on Zoom and your eye goes bloody, cloudy red, maybe something's wrong. So I want to thank all of you who reached out to me and helped me when I was at my worst. And I hope that I have been able to be a source of inspiration for other people as well. So what I'm going to start off with, did go to, here is for those of you who did not attend graduation, this is the actual program. Yeah, we were outside in 50-degree weather, when usually, looking back at my Facebook statuses for the last couple of years, usually it's like 70-degree weather. So it was kind of cold, but it was fabulous being out there. And I'd forgotten how much I miss the normalcy of a university. You know, normal times we do things like graduation, we do things like gala in person, and everyone's dressed up. The writer's idea of what dressed up is. And I even missed our departmental reception with the canapes. I miss the food, to be honest. I miss the food. So I thought I could read the names of the folks listed in the program. Not everyone who's graduating in the summer graduations won't be listed here. And there may be a name that's a blast from the past, because people can extend by years sometimes and graduate when you don't expect them to. So I'm going to read the names that are ours, that are MFAs in creative writing. And then I'm going to have the honor of reading a poem by one of these people who wasn't able to join us because she said her aunts would kill her, not us, but kill her if she didn't visit. So these are the graduates listed in the program. Master of Fine Arts, Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, Dylan Cale Davis. Elizabeth J. Engelmeyer. Jessica Freeman. Lauren McDaniel Crawford. Sarah O. Shore. Kyle Stolzenberg. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to work with those people. For those of you not recognizing the name Sarah Shore, she did her thesis and her thesis defense a while back, but she's an incredibly inventive writer and a really funny person. So I wanted to read her name. So the next thing I want to do is read a poem by Jessica Freeman. Jessica Freeman received an MA in creative writing in English from the Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and then joined our program here at Carbondale. So she's a 2-degree graduate of Southern Illinois University, the system, and was one of our finest teachers and kindest people in the program. She wasn't able to join us today, so I'm going to read a poem of hers to start us off, and then we'll hear from Liz Engelmeyer. This poem is titled On the Pontoon. Anchored in the thick glow of June, air wet with the scent of mom's white diamonds and copper tone oil. Her gold-plated chain glints against her tanned breast. Early morning sun skirts the water's waves. Our laughter bounces off the timberline in front of us where muskrats burrow beneath driftwood. They dive for crayfish under the pitched chirrups of sparrows as we climb the plastic ladder on the pontoon. We do black backflips off the bright orange roof, tumbling into the muscle-rich river like solemn rocks. Each time I rise through water, the sound of mom singing, House of the Rising Sun, drifts from the dock where she lounges on a raggedy-edged beach towel. My eyes mist in a film of mud water. Gnats circle and hum behind her, a swarm, always chasing her burned and brown back. It's a really lovely poem to start us out with. So we are going to move to fiction with this person has persevered, showed me what perseverance is. Elizabeth Engelmeyer writes as Elliot LaGrange and is the granddaughter of a mortician and was raised in a household where death was dinner table conversation. She has published both fiction and poetry in various magazines and is the co-host of the podcast Saints and Witches. Thesis title, Nobody Girl.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm going to be reading from the last section of my thesis, which, funnily enough, I wrote while I was sick with COVID. So hope it makes sense. My thesis is a suspense novel about the murder of a 7-year-old little girl named Anna Willison. Her murder takes place in a tiny southern Illinois town. I will be reading 2 and/or 3 chapters. We'll see how time goes from the point of view of Pips Cheney, who is a local stalker with a sensory overload disorder who is obsessed with solving this case. Under the howl of rain, Pips pounded on the Lowell's front door as hard as she could with open palms, shouting, but no one answered. I know you're here. I know you can hear me. I know what your son did. I know he took Anna, she yelled, smacking the door, her skin a high-pitched squeal. Let me in or I'll come in. Wind snapped against the house, and in the driveway, Pips's motorcycle tipped over and smashed against the concrete. In the same moment, lightning cracked across the sky like a webbing of veins and thunder exploded. She sprinted for her racer, ducking against the rain, and picked it up. She needed to get it out of the storm if she wanted a bike to come back to after this. Running through a mental list of options, she settled on the shed behind the Lowell's house. It was quickest and offered the most cover. With effort, she pushed her bike through the slog of the yard toward the shed. The shed doors were flapping loose and wild in the wind. She waited for one of the doors to blow open to make her move inside, but before she could cross the shed's threshold, it swung back. The door slammed into her from behind and knocked her down on top of her bike, her hips striking something metal. For a second, her vision blacked out, but she breathed through the pain and got herself weakly back to her feet, lifted her bike, and pulled it into the shed after her. It stunk in the shed like rotten eggs and sewage, and there was barely enough room for her or her bike with the riding lawnmower parked in the middle. But she walked backward with her bike and wedged it between the lawnmower and the shed wall. Giving it a final heave, she stepped back onto something in the dark, rolling her ankle and falling into the wall. Tools clattered. Shifting to her good foot and wrinkling her nose against a wave of stench, she patted her jacket for her phone and turned on its flashlight after a few failed attempts caused by her wet fingers not tracking on the screen. The light on, she aimed it at the floor to see what she'd tripped over, and immediately pressed herself against the wall, stifling a scream. Her heart hammered. At her feet, crammed in the narrow space behind the riding mower, was Taryn Venable. She was in the fetal position, bloated, blistered, discolored, her neck a bloom of dark bruising. From her nose and slack mouth, a bloody foam was leaking onto the floor of the shed. Pip squatted a little when she noticed movement in Taryn's eyes and mouth and, pointing her flashlight, discovered the movement was maggots. Nausea hooked through her, and she had to look away, tell herself she wasn't seeing this, wasn't smelling this. She didn't know much about dead bodies, but Taryn looked like she'd been here a while, and, eyes widening, Pips realized how many times she'd been at the Lowells in the last few days, digging through the fire pit with Billy, watching Hoffman and Piplo question Della from the cornfield. Had Taryn been here? Or, a better question, had Clayton done this too? Trembling, Pip swiped over to her camera and took photos of Taryn's body, then uploaded them to her drive. But the upload bar under the photos never flopped from waiting to a percentage, and crap. She didn't have a signal out here. What was she thinking? Of course she didn't have a signal. She'd never had a signal out here. She bit her lip and tried to steady herself. No service sat at the top of her screen, inflexible. No data, no ability to call someone and tell them what she'd found. She thought about leaving for help, but the sky outside of the clacking shed doors strobed between black and electric blue, and another crack of thunder split the air. The idea of being a human lightning rod riding down the road on her bike wasn't a comfortable one, but no sooner than she'd formed the thought, stay here in the shed, wait out the storm. A siren warbled long and loud through the country, a siren that meant only one thing: tornado. I'm skipping ahead a couple chapters. What you are missing in that is that in a desperate bid to find shelter from this approaching tornado, Pips accidentally runs into Hank and Dale Woomer, who are two brothers who've been suspects in Anna's murder the whole novel. When she recognizes the shotgun in their possession as the murder weapon in Anna's case, they take her captive. Pips bent herself in half to tear at the zipper of her left boot with her teeth. It gave down to the leather belt cuffed around her ankles. Huffing as she folded in half again, she bit at her other zipper, then dragged her heels against the thin carpet fast and hard to loosen her boots. Lightning flashed through the squat window of the trailer and illuminated the spare room and the tree growing through a hole in the floor. Underneath the cuffs, her right boot started to come off, and she worked vigorously until she managed to get her toes slid back to the heel inside her right boot. She pushed and twisted her foot, but it wasn't enough to get free of her shoe, so she scooted across the carpet and wedged her boot into the hole in the floor and pulled, and her boot slid off and out from under the cuff, which made the cuff slack enough for her to fish the belt tongue out of its loop with her mouth. Once her ankles were unrestrained, she attempted to grab her boot from the hole with her feet, but as soon as she touched it, it plummeted through. Crap, she whispered. Crap, crap. Tears pricked at her eyes, but even though she willed them back immediately, panic set in. Her phone was gone, smashed. Her bike keys had been taken. Her wrists were stuck cuffed behind her back. It didn't matter how much she fumbled at what she could reach of the belt with her fingertips. Didn't matter how much she struggled, the cuffs wouldn't budge. Now her shoe was gone, and at any moment Dale was going to come back to deal with her. He had to deal with her. That was inevitable. She closed her eyes for a second, eyelashes wet on her cheeks, and swallowed against the quiver in her throat. She'd never gotten to a landline, which meant no one was coming to Ridgewood, which meant no one was coming for her. And even if by some miracle they were, no one knew she was here in the trailer. If she wanted to survive this, it was on her. She rolled onto her knees and chin and got herself up onto her feet, unsteady with a maelstrom of noise and the sound of her own frantic pulse in her ears. She'd got something very wrong. Hank had tied her up, but only once forced to at gunpoint. Were the Woomers not in this together? Was Clayton not Anna's killer since the Woomers had the shotgun? Or was Clayton an accomplice? She stumbled toward the door, backed up against it, and pressed and pulled the knob, trying to get it to unlock. Each time it failed, her eyes clouded with more tears. Come on, she coached, begged, prayed. Come on, please. She pressed and twisted again, and nothing, and pow! Her heart tripped, then thumped once so hard she thought it was going to come out her throat, then pounded everywhere, her chest, her ears, her jaw, her stomach. She jerked at the door like a mad woman, shaking. That was a gunshot. That was a gunshot in the other room, a real live gunshot feet away. Was she going to die? Was she next? Nausea slammed into her, and finally the doorknob unlatched, and she flung it wide with haste and staggered through into the dark living room, and she saw Dale in the hallway with a shotgun and a screwdriver. Fear kicked her square in the chest at the sight of him, and she didn't think, just darted for the front door and threw herself into it. It broke open under her weight, and she tumbled headlong down the trailer stairs, arms smashing into edges, feet flopping over her head as she landed on her neck. She rolled to her feet, winded, vision too bright, fishbowled, and ran for the end of the trailer, toward the trees, tripping once, getting back up. Footsteps sprinted through gravel behind her, so she cut sideways behind the trailer in the direction of the creek, headed for the cover of trees there as quick as she could. But her run was awkward and one-shoed, her arms bound. Her body thrummed with adrenaline and fear and desperation, and when she hit the tree line, bark exploded to her left like shrapnel. The echo of a shotgun blast dogged her heels as she kept running, into the trees, through the brush, forward through everything. But the land dipped in a sudden decline, and it was slick with rain and mud, and she had no hands to catch herself, and she could see the creek below her, rushing, flooded, dark and dangerous, but there was no stopping her momentum. She skidded into a fall and rolled so fast the sky blurred with the ground, rolled and rolled until, with a gasp, she crashed into freezing water and was sucked under into blackness. And I don't know if you want me to read the next chapter or not. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Go ahead. Cool.
Yes, please.
This is the next time that we see Pips. So Pips gasped for air. She didn't know how far down the creek she was. All she could see were trees everywhere every time her head broke the surface. It was hard to stay calm. Everything was moving so fast, and her nose stung and her throat burned and her arms were still bound. She jerked her arms in the belt cuff again, screaming in frustration. A bad choice, because the current slammed her into a tree branch and she was sucked under the water without any air in her lungs. She could feel in the dark blindly, in her breathless panic, all the branches under the water like a hard netting. She kicked at them with her feet, body begging for air, and found one that was sturdy enough to stand on and got her head back above the surface. But she knew as soon as she did that she was screwed, that she was probably looking at the last minutes of her life. The current was too strong to throw herself into. She'd just get blown back into the branches, and the water at her chin was already climbing toward her mouth. It was going to keep climbing. She was going to drown here. Flattening her lips into a seam as the water level crawled upward, she twisted her arms in the cuffs. Everything was so cold. Every time the belt shifted against her skin, it felt like being flayed to the bone. But with no other options to get it loose, like an animal, she struggled. When the water level hit her upper lip, though, and she still wasn't free, she gave up. Time for a new plan. There was no swimming under the branch, no swimming around it, but she might be able to get over it. It just wasn't going to be pretty. And realizing what she had to do to accomplish it, panic crowded under her jaw. She lifted her cuffed arms to confirm they wouldn't come higher than mid-back the way they were bound, and the tree branch was at her neck. Yeah, she was going to have to do this the way she didn't want to. Clasping her hands together and taking a deep breath, she dunked herself forward into the water, bending and bending under the blackness until her arms broke the surface behind her. Then she felt for the tree branch. When she found it, she hooked her arms over it at the elbows and heaved herself up as fast as she could. Throwing her body into the momentum, she hauled herself out of the water in quick traction over the branch behind her. It wasn't easy. The angle was wrong. Her muscles were jelly, but she cried out and panted and paddled as hard as she could with her feet. Everywhere the branch's bark scraped, her skin was on fire. Her bootless foot found leverage on something, and she shoved herself up using it, bowed backward over the branch in a sharp curve, her entire chest out of the water now. She shoved until the branch was a solid bar against the small of her back, and her weight was balanced on top of it. The water rushed, but she was altered above the surface. Paralyzed at her success, too afraid to move and lose all her progress, she stared at the raging sky and let her heartbeat bring itself back to a calmer rhythm. Then, slowly, she shifted her submerged arms inside their cuffs, back and forth, a little at a time. When her right wrist popped free and her arms separated, a grateful sob snapped out of her throat, and a dozen more followed suit. Arms spread wide, she wept, unashamed, and breathed in the smell of wet earth and creek water and rain.
My God. But I always have this reaction to whatever you read. And I have to admit that, thrillers are not my thing, but you write so beautifully and frankly, so scarily. Like, I you know, I remember you reading during Writers in Common, and just, I was like at the edge of my seat. And again, uh, first of all, you write good, scary stuff. So congratulations and thank you for reading. Since we have fewer readers than usual, folks are going to read for longer, but I did want to give a memory. And this happened in 2019. And this was my fault as director of the program, but I didn't know that libraries were so evil. Pinckney may remember that that year, we only had 3 students graduating, 2 fiction writers and 1 poet. And I thought, oh, we'll be out of there fast. I'll just reserve the SIU library auditorium and we'll be out of there shipshape. Little did I know that everyone was going to read long, and everyone was going to, we've had a tradition in the past where graduating students would get sent off by people in classes below them. So people read long sentimental letters about their graduating, fellow writers, and it was beautiful. But I got taken to task by the dean of the library because we went over. So this is the good thing about Zoom and the good thing about having this up on YouTube. We can go as long as we want. So I'm really happy that no one's going to come kick me out of my own house. All right, thank you for that auspicious yet absolutely frightening beginning. We're going to have some poetry now. Our next presenter is Brittany Cordera, whose thesis title is Venerations. I had the great privilege of serving as thesis director for this particular book of poems. A little bit about Brittany. Brittany was a finalist for the 2020 Narrative 30 Below contest. Her poetry can be found or is forthcoming in Rhino, in Narrative, Xavier Review, and Penk. Currently, she is a teaching artist through the St. Louis Poetry Center and has just been named a journalist for Focus Black Oklahoma. And I've come to learn that she loves to roller skate in her free time. So I am so pleased to present my friend, Brittany Cordera.
Thank you so much, Allison, for that introduction. And I really appreciate your presence at my thesis defense and your support through these 3 years. I'm just so grateful. And I'm also like just super honored to call you my friend as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to be reading some poems from Generations. Let me see. What do I want to read first? Okay, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this acrostic poem, which an acrostic poem is a poem that is about a piece of art or an homage to a piece of art. The piece of art that this is an homage to is actually not really art, but it is art, but not traditionally art. It was a painting of, or just like back then, you know, they didn't have photos, and this was a artist's rendition of slaves walking the slave trail from Virginia to Tennessee between 1810 and 1860. So this piece of art can be found in the Folk Art Museum in Williamsburg, Virginia, and it's titled Promise of West. And it has an epigraph. Arise, arise, and weep no more. Dry up your tears, we shall part no more. Come rose, we go to Tennessee, that happy shore. To old Virginia, never, never return. Some bodies handcuffed in pairs to each other with iron staples and bolts. Others staring right at you, eyes hollowed out like mouths, marching west from Virginia to Tennessee. Barefoot in the snow, Anison, 9 years old, dances his way out of the coffle line to feel persimmon cling to his soles, sweetened by frost. I know we were here at some point around this bend because a tableau of the lesser-known slave trail hangs at the Folk Art Museum in Williamsburg, Virginia. The land told me it was him. Relatives suffered to go on, darkening the white path in this print, hopeful that the longer west they walk, the less likely they are to be whipped. Their children grow out of this Achilles heel. This poem is titled Gold Hoops. My ears have been pierced since I was an infant. Before I learned to remember my world, I've worn studs and hoops, real gold and diamond, so my skin would not react to the rust of other metals. Somewhere in a lost tub, there are baby pictures of me screaming as the needle pierced my long lobes. This ritual, little letting of blood, the women in my family practiced for healthy daughters. poem is titled Shoes, and it also has an epigraph from the New York Observer from January 26, 1829. On Tuesday evening, we fell in with detachment of poor Cherokee Indians. Multitudes go on foot, even aged females, apparently nearly ready to drop into the grave. We're traveling with heavy burdens attached to the back. On the sometimes frozen ground and sometimes muddy streets, with no covering for the feet except what nature had given them. The month after my carbon fiber arches broke, my feet cramped up with plantar fasciitis. Hopeful these inserts would be my feet for a few more years, I placed them in a wooden box sitting on my altar next to a geode, grateful for their time and covering. Some nights, I massage the cramps in circles with my knuckles in the crevice of my feet where my arches collapsed. I sit there making up names for beloveds who used pawpaw skins for shoes, their paper trail removed from our roots. Every day I hike the Shawnee Forest. It reveals itself more to me. I trip on a bramble of roots, then jabbed in the chest by spear-shaped honeysuckle. The wolf trees, once alone at the center of the forest, girthy, tall, and branches sprawling, remind me how perfect this place was for bearing roped ancestors as fruit. A reminder we have always been unwelcome guests in our abode. I wonder if I'm built for this kind of activity, retracing our steps, hiking the Smokies to Oklahoma during chlorophyll-starved winter, through frost-bitten beech and fallen American chestnut. This doesn't feel random. My mother having arches meant to fly across mountain peaks in stilettos and platforms, owning a million pairs of them, I'll one day inherit. I can't help but wonder if she surrounds herself with so many to avoid following in our family's footsteps, or to keep the spirits at bay that desire. A privilege to own a single pair in a world where we hardly own our name. This next poem I'm gonna read is something I'd like to call or something that I've coined to be a photo box poem. So I'm gonna have several of these poems, and I have several of these poems in my thesis, but I'm gonna have more. And this is what the picture looks like. This is my great-grandmother, Lavinia, and we think my grandfather, but it also could be an aunt. And it's titled, daguerreotype photo ripped on both edges of great-grandma Lavinia wearing white linen and apron, holding my grandfather or great-aunt, unknown woman to left wearing same clothes, 1932. Last month, I uploaded this photo of her to Deep Nostalgia. Watched her facial features come to life, morph into my own reflection. To bridge a portal between our worlds, place a mirror on your Boveda with a few old pictures you found on Facebook. The chills I get when I'm any place that holds our rememory. The Trail of Tears, Gower Cemetery, Mobile Bay. Like seeing her lips part into that smile as she followed the 20th century camera's direction. That feeling when someone walks on top of your life's grave before. Though I'm not in this photo, I could be. The vision seated in her shadowy womb, child 7 out of 9, the same amount of full-blooded siblings my mother has. She lost her first son, John, to World War II, but I have a couple pictures of him as well I'll place on our altar. I wonder most about the woman left of her, cut out intentionally by the photographer, or accidentally due to the camera's small lens, and the child she was holding, unable to keep their body forward and still for a few more seconds. Her Creole husband must have called her my African goddess right as this memory was snapped into permanency. Am I doing okay on time? I haven't really been paying attention, sorry. I'll just read a couple more poems. Okay. This next poem is one that is taken from a series of poems that I have in my collection. There's not really a form to this series, but the series is titled Paper Trail. And the form that I kind of was imagining for this was, I'm telling the story of the pieces of information that I do have, and so they occur incongruently in the collection, kind of out of time, and just kind of out of order because this is how the information has been presented to me. And this particular sequence is called Black Creek, and it's about Lavinia. Lavinia called herself Black Creek after she inherited her late father's piece of arid scrub where pecan and blackjack oak persist. Knowing this, the creek treated her family like their own, and white pioneers stopped harassing her for the land upon finding out this was Indian territory. Her identity, a keepsake game of telephone passed down generation to generation. All we have is an oral history, no names on rolls listed under Freeman. Her father, the 89er he named himself, is nameless from all census records between 1837 and 1885. His Creek wife's maiden name erased. A pattern of denying the wolves in our blood feels no different than this. A mother telling strangers her firstborn was Asian when they asked what she was mixed with, further ridding traces of bestial lineage. I think I'm gonna read just 2 more poems and then I'll call it a day. Yeah, I'll read 2 more poems. Okay. This one is titled Revelations. Beside your distance, the sound of rainbow trout stilled in a river warmer than the bag and tent we are sleeping in. The current, like birdsong, will never put a name to that might begin to ascribe a secret note for the end of this world and how it will happen. A continent on fire begets the floods, begets the drought, begets the tornadoes, begets the locusts, begets a branding iron burning our lungs, these titans. Want to say something, great horned owls duetting to each other from one stolen nest to another, the snore of the tent dwellers next door, and what of yours, a deep breathing that skips over saliva like the flat stone rocks we tossed in that tepid current to watch jounce across the water's surface, and the remainders of autumn, white oak smolders gold in the fire we could have waited a little longer to burn out. And then the last poem I'm going to write is Encounter with Oshun on the Mississippi. In a lot of ways, Oshun and any of the deities that I invoke in this are like, how do I explain it? Like, I don't know how to explain it other than saying that like I am invoking my mother in a lot of ways, because I have so much reverence for her, and she she is a woman of power, and so anytime I invoke like a spirit or a deity, I am invoking her image, and I'm paying homage and honor to her. So this is titled Encounter with Oshun on the Mississippi, and this will be my last poem. Against a backdrop of fog and sunrise, near the bank of the sweet-smelling river, a dark woman emerges, clad in gold, coral, and white scales. Her black hair, knotted with cowrie shells, flows into fresh waters. Her black skin, auric burnt from humidity and cicadas ringing endless late Julys. In Yoruba, she is the only female spirit who could create the earth as is. Her brothers could not. She looks at me like family, a younger sister, a miscarried brother, my own mother. I look at her like a stranger putting a name to her face, Oba, Oya, Oludumare. And just before I recognize her, Oshun of rivers, Oshun of beauty, Oshun of wealth, Oshun of fertility, she transforms into a horseshoe crab and disappears into clearing mist, rushing trash in the waters I'm there to clean up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You know how much I love you. I've said that so many times, and it is such a pleasure to hear how your work has developed and how it has taken in so many influences and gone so many places. And I just see wonderful things ahead for you, and you're making them happen. And yes, let's go to NOLA. We're gonna go to NOLA. So we have at least 2 more readers for you because Dylan Davis is going to read. So we're going to have more fiction. But before that, I have the extreme pleasure of introducing this young woman who, you know, when you meet someone and you know someone's going to be important for you and the rest of your life, and that this person is, you just fall in love with them instantly. That was how I felt when I met Ash Durrance. I met her years ago now when she was doing her MA at Auburn University, where I was doing a visiting writer stint, and she came to a workshop and she just sparkled. And she didn't let us down. She has been an amazing presence. First of all, for her poetry that takes on all sorts of subjects. She's been able to write beautifully and critically of her own strange background in the chapbook Orlando, and write about love and loss in her full-length collection, Tall House Drawn Dark. So please help me in welcoming the delicious, the wonderful Ash Durrance.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was so sweet. I didn't expect that. I also felt the same way when I met you. I just knew I knew I was going to be here and interact with Allison Joseph for the rest of my life. Same feeling I had when I met Brittany, to be honest. Okay, so I will read a series of poems. The first poem I'm going to read, I wrote at the beginning of the pandemic, and it is called Isolation in Illinois. Daffodils gather in yellow fists. Out my window, I watch cars pass on the one road that runs beneath the train's rail and splits this town in two. A single horn shrieks, birds swarm, time looms like smoke between the trees, and movement comes back in color. This is the land that taught me to live with things that burn. The man smoking on the stoop fills a bucket with cigarettes, and somewhere close, a woman kneels to clean the soot from her stove. 3 months into the new year, and already the day has learned how to exile me from my own self. Each hour turns hollow the longer I stay inside it. Where else to go but the stillness of this minute when the black heap of birds rise, and I know what the sky must know when those wings swell, then sink. This is temporary. Still, my body is charred by what it cannot ignite, and all I've locked inside my head slips out. My hands somehow are full of matches, of tulips, of all these brittle red bulbs. The next poem I will read is called Nashville, and part of my thesis investigates a past relationship, past engagement I had, and this poem is a particular memory. Nashville. In the hotel room, I watched my love's mouth fold in as he said, world, world. The word he struggled most to say when he had a lisp at age 3. Outside, the black-capped chickadees set off their alarm call. Days before, my back was turned to him while I washed dishes, and he spoke of a girl he once knew. Years older than him, who would come when summer's mad dog kicked up black mud and the wind swallowed its final song, and the sun was a skewered plum by dusk. To kneel, showing him a child who could not know what it was a girl could do with her mouth between his legs, then on and on for days. Back home, the crepe myrtles bloomed in puckered lips, and the southern tulips were the vacant red bells of Danish girls' skirts. In Nashville, he knew the land better than I as we drove on road edge with slack-jawed cliff, the houses built on stilts and balanced like saucers above our heads, until one with its second-story window in flames shouted its rage right down at me. Rage of the empty, filled without asking, rage of any skin that curdles when touched. Another thing I explore in the thesis, which that poem dips into briefly, is sexual assault, my personal experience with sexual assault, and sort of the blurred lines, for lack of a better term, of sexual relationships in general. Before we hop into that quite yet, I will read a poem called Affair. No one tells you that the heart makes foul meat, or that to be young is to be gold spun by whiskey and lust. A married man, my dorm room, and rain falling into fangs on the street where weeks before I had been struck by a car and flown like a sheet. On my bed, the man's body was a lie I told myself to trust. His mouth a rim of pink glass lightning leaves when it strikes, and when he called my name, a double drum beat to the wall, the vowels clung to the copper pipes like rust, and I felt beyond the brick, across the courtyard, the concrete simmer, and knew, as cannibals do, what it is to feast. Isn't there always power in things most unjust? He was a bird whose legs were ropes strung across a fishing fleet, and the day's thin cloth was a sail my sorrow soon would crease. I want fragrant petals, gunmetal, lime to crush between my teeth, a wild boar skinned of her red meat to climb into before I cross another busy, panting street. I have a series of poems in my thesis that are Persephone poems, and they envision sexual assault through the myth of Hades and Persephone's, but are really, truly a way for me to explore persona in order to better understand my own experiences. Portrait of Hades as a man returned from war. The day I met the married man, I asked about his scar. Off the edge of the Arabian Peninsula, knocked clean by the sun's red glove, he and a dozen other American soldiers scoured dirt road after dirt road with war on their tongues. When he speaks now, the scar flickers, cleaves a brief canal into his cheek. It was a bomb tucked into the belly of their Jeep, then tall white spires of flame gutting the vehicle of what flesh and bone it held. Blustered by the explosion, his body silvered, rising with clotted smoke, gravity dropping its grizzled parts all around him. Arrows of glass and gasoline and the severed head of a single man. That's when the sparrows came, he said, circling me with yellow wings and violet eyes. Soldiers who fled called up at him, though it was his wife's voice he heard instead, funneling out across the red sand. He said, I beat death and felt like a goddamn king. But beneath that heat-carved land came a chorus of souls, bruised and brackish, spilling forth misery, their own tired tune as they churned, coming loose for those shrilling notes of death, of king. The next poem I will read, if I can find it, explores sort of the aftermath of a sexual assault in terms of the way trauma works, how just the weirdest, most random thing can trigger you to remembering the sexual assailant. This poem is called Devil. What shape are you today? Jagged black profile on a tinted window, or a stranger's crown of salt and pepper hair. In bed, I think of you each time a man says, come for me. I think of you when my eyes are closed and I'm belly down with my face to a wall or bed frame or the backside of a couch. It never matters how well I know the men I choose to sleep with. If I can't see his face, I speak in spells, calling his name 3 times to reverse the curse of you. Keen elegy, your name has since become. Some days it's myself I'm reminded of. A child alone at a round desk, cramming the small letters B and D into the blue bars of a blank page. I taught myself the difference, how B looks right and D left, like a pot-bellied man gazing at himself in a mirror. A two-sided figure, life was so much simpler back then, golf club or quarter note. The last poem I'll read, which happens to be the last poem of the manuscript, is called Persephone Emerges. Here in the emerald city of the Florida Everglades, comfort comes back to me and creatures I can name. Ferns unbarb their ladders from the trees, and gators crawl upland once sun sets night loose. I learned in the underworld what such beauty could be when held to fire and thrust, black pit, bull tongue, shovel, until it became a simple tool, an easy machine. Around me, dark cypress steeple, and the bog's gut bloats with algae and lilies and the unsung ivory pipes of fishbone. I am no one's queen, but forgive me, for I have done monstrous things, and monstrous things have been done to me. Beside the swamp, I wrenched the devil's seeds out from between my legs, and in my palm, their bloodied roots of teeth, dye cast in snake eyes, dogwood petals charred and pink. I am no one's mother, but where I step, toads unknot and bullfrogs bark from across the way. Beneath the loam, spring knocks. Though I have cheated and I have lied and I have cried with a man inside my mouth, the ground clutches me back with the pull of 10,000 moons. Down there, I witnessed my body trick rape into love. Earth shudders each place I walk, and empires of daffodils flood my feet. Thank you.
Just amazing, just amazing. Thank you so much for those devastatingly beautiful poems. Scary in a different way, scary in a different way. So I'm so happy that we're going to have two more readers from the fiction side of the program. And I need to say that I generally don't get to teach the fiction writers unless they swim over like Liz did to the poetry side. But I'm equally grateful to Pinckney and RA for shepherding these projects, these beautiful projects into being. And I haven't gotten to like physically see a lot of the fiction writers for a long, long time now. So first of all, congratulations for doing this. It's hard enough to write poetry in a pandemic, but to write a whole novel in a pandemic, that's asking a lot of oneself. So congratulations. And I'm looking forward to hearing some more fiction. Our next reader is Dylan Davis. Dylan Davis is a fiction writer from, and Dylan just wrote this and sent this to me. Is a fiction writer from the Mars-like deserts of Utah. He has published several pieces in magazines such as Fiction International, Hobart, and Driftwood Press. During his MFA, he fell in love with game narrative and new media narrative. He was the first ever research assistant in this area at SIU, hopefully not the last, and is now shopping his thesis novel, Salt Lake Shitty. I'm sorry, I just had to giggle at that, around while developing the multimedia platform Neophyte Studios Network, which people are watching this production on right now. So take it away, Dylan.
Indeed they are. Indeed they are. Sorry, I'm stream running and I'm getting ready. So I'm going to remove you. Okay, cool. I'm all alone up here and a little blurrier. Yeah, so I'm going to read from Salt Lake City. It's a cyberpunk novel about my home state and a particularly dominant cultural force, which has been appropriated aggressively and turned into the villains of a science fiction novel. So this particular chapter will take place. It's kind of it's a strange part of the novel to follow, but the protagonist, Boot, he has to go into a virtual reality overlay of Salt Lake City, where people tend to go to either conduct business or pleasure. And he's in here to investigate a particular lead that he got on solving a case of this drug that's sweeping around the mega city. So he's following this lead, and naturally, it goes awry. So I'll start with this, but just kind of picture in your mind like he's essentially a video game character. He's essentially a video game avatar walking around in virtual digital space, not so much a physical corporeal being. Although in 2021, are any of us physical corporeal beings? So Boot clipped through the digital floor and was hurtling downward. He could see the Van to Black, an assassin who was sent to kill him. He could see the Van to Black through the floor mesh texture. It still furiously stabbed at the ground. His clipping through the floor revealed the awkward, unrendered interiors of the unloaded buildings in Samsara, the name of the virtual reality overworld. As he hurtled downward, he gawked at the underside of the virtual universe. It became spherical, like he orbited a whole inverted world. Boot rolled in the air. Wind rushed around his ears, deafening him. The darkness below was all-consuming, a bottomless black pit. The death cycle. Boot had only heard of what happens down here. He had been too afraid to virtually die. Samsara had been taking a weird, pedantic direction for the past few years. It felt wrong to have his in-world behavior data retooled for a life lesson. The floor came into view. It was just a different shade of black, growing out from some central point as the level, for lack of a better word, loaded. There was nothing there to catch him. The ground rushed toward him, and he smashed on what felt like gooey pavement. He lay there a moment, trying to breathe through the worst windedness he had ever felt. He gulped strained breaths, curled his fingers against the ground, and lifted his feet above his head. People get addicted to this shit, he choked out. A gentle stream of warm water started lapped around his earlobes, down his back and feet. He shook his head, sat up, and looked to see where the water was coming from. It was not a stream. The water just emanated from somewhere beyond his sight. Boot could not help but feel there was something back there, pushing the water toward him. He looked down at his legs. The ink-black water was now above his slightly bent kneecaps, rising toward his belly, then his ribs. Boot shot to his feet. He turned in a circle to see where to go, but it was just dark in every direction. The water was at his waist, at standing height, and rushed more strongly. He had to lean against the current. Then a blinding light came on overhead, as though the sun had just been flicked on. He covered his head with his arms. He looked up at it through his fingers and his partially closed, watering eyes. The light above was so bright it burned his skin. The underside of a gargantuan sink faucet looked down on him. Hands the size of buildings worked a sponge across a plate the size of a city block, like watching God do his dishes. Is this a joke? Boot said. One of the huge hands reached for the brushed silver faucet lever. Water shot from the spout and careened toward him. Boot raised his arms in anticipation, but the force of the water plastered him to the ground instantly and completely. The torrent was so strong, it pinned him to the ground. It pounded his head against the floor beneath him. He didn't know water could hurt. He was unable to thrash his arms, drowning. The sink must have turned off because Boot floated to the surface of the water. He kicked his legs for speed, breaking the surface. He sucked in a huge breath. The air tasted rancid and soapy. The water around him was racing somewhere, carrying him with it. A rumble distorted the air. The water roiled in an unnatural fervor, creating a mist. The sound emanated from below him. His feet vibrated so much that they hurt. He went over a lip into a huge drain, and then he was in free fall again. He realized then what the rumbling was. For only the briefest moment, boots saw grime the size of rolling hills and building-sized foodstuff covering the gargantuan blades. They spun wickedly in a blur. Sun. Bright sun, hot sun. Dry dirt, thickly cracked so far and out of sight. To the right, a copse of woods, a small pond shimmering in the heat like a rug near a hearth. The grit bites the soles of feet as they pad toward the pond, weaving between the tufts of teal shrubs. Near the pond, grass pokes from the tawny ground. Along the shore of the pond, pockets of foam float and bobble. Tracing the shore, the pockets of foam lead to a humanoid crouched low, sifting through the shallow water. The humanoid is male. His compacted package clings to his groin like moss on stone. His musculature is exaggerated, thick sections of flesh contained by the sun's scarred skin. He gently runs his fingertips across the surface of the water, creating disturbances which ripple across the whole pond. He is looking for something. The pockets of foam react seconds later. He finds what he searches for. It's a small nutshell with a string run through it. I'm so sorry. My girlfriend is currently locked out of the house. Okay, we're good to go. It's a small nutshell with strings run through it. When he closes his hand around the nutshell, he hoists up toward the sun quickly, yanking scintillating, dripping net from the water. Fish flap and swing their tails inside. The commotion dies quickly. The humanoid looks pleased. He holds the net high like a trophy. Back at the village, the humanoid male trots into the center with swagger and ease. The iconography of the village is that of pronghorn antelopes. Their antlers utilized as fire spits, door decoration. Their skeletons are stacked atop each other as effigies or lashed together in sidewalks. There is a huge unfinished tapestry which is pulled taut on its loom. It depicts the visage of a pronghorn antelope. A few members of the tribe come to him, looking at his bag of now stilled fish. They are pleased too. Another, larger man comes from a large hut, the largest hut. He is more adorned than the others, and he is less pleased than the others. He nears the male with the net, rips it from his hand, holds it up between them, and curses strangely. Though the language is indiscernible, we know the adorned man is worried. The fisherman gestures toward the net, then points at the sky. A tribesman nearly clasps his forehead and walks away. The adorned man scowls and makes a frustrated hoot. The adorned man points behind himself, out of the village and over some large hills. He is worried about what is over there. Years later, the fisherman is at the pond. His net design has changed slightly, become more refined. He pulls a string attached to the nutshell. The net is finer, so fewer fish slip through the spaces. Back at the village, I am so sorry. The door is not opening. Back at the village, fish iconography has been mixed in with the antelope. Fish are painted on huts. Their corpses cook over every fire. Fish surround the pronghorn antelope's visage on the huge tapestry. The adorned man comes from his large hut, and his demeanor is different. He is happy, not worried anymore about the net. He pats the fisherman on the shoulder, then points behind him toward the hills. A dust cloud is wafting skyward, and in the dust cloud comes hundreds of people, the other tribe. They intermingle within the fish tribe. The adorned man removes his headdress and hands it to the fisherman. Everyone comes together, lifting the fisherman high above them, cheering. Many years later, again, the tribe has grown so large that their villages reach to the hills. The adorned fisherman lounges on a bed he's installed outside the largest hut. Tribespeople bring him food on weaved beds of teal shrubs. He picks at the food, dropping white flesh into his mouth. He pries a rib bone from a fish and slides it between his teeth. He waves them away. They disperse. Fish iconography has replaced all pronghorn antelope. In the center of town, the previously adorned man, fat and sitting, looks to die soon. Back at the pond, the baubles of foam are gone. A fisherman yanks the net from the water, but it is empty. They are out of fish. Back at the village, the tribespeople rip the adorned fisherman from his post and hurl him to the central area by the previously adorned man. They draw blades and ram them into the leaders. Blood spray mixes with the dust kicked up in the scuffle. When it settles, both men cry out in pain and are left to scream in growing pools of blood. Many years later, the village is broken down, the huts are reclaimed, and no one is there. A single antelope trots through the central area, leans down, snags a teal shrub between its square yellow teeth, then pulls up, chomping. Many years later, the broken huts have been repaired and tribespeople have returned. Both fish and antelope cook above fires, and as do many other meats and foods. The members look just healthy enough to maintain. They aren't full bodied as they were at the height of the fish era, but they look better than at the end of the fish era. Inside one of the huts, a young member of the tribe, a female, works at a computer made of barks and twigs and leaves. The screen shimmers as she searches through an algorithm she's written to track antelope patterns. A new, older, adorned man casts the door flap to her hut aside. He charges toward her and grabs her hand. He scorns her for her work, then toward the hills. He is worried. Book came to on the floor of a gray warehouse. There was a constant hum which reverberated around. 100 meters overhead, the line of fluorescent lights stretched beyond his sight. Thank you.
I love the world building in that. And it reminds me how much I've missed going to our traditional in-person readings where our fiction writers and our poets and our hybrid writers and everybody in the program gets to read from what they're working on. So thank you so much. And thank you for pushing this program into the future, or some would say the present. I'm so pleased what's been developed in terms of, and y'all got to catch me up. Y'all got to get me beyond just basic Zoom. So when we're actually able to meet again, I want people to teach me more about all the things that we've developed, because it's awesome and not every MFA program is doing this. So we've got at least one more reader. And thanks everybody for holding on with us and being here with us this afternoon. I am so excited that this has turned out to be a beautiful celebration of this program and of our accomplishments. So our next reader is David Ballard, and he stepped up, wasn't sure that he was going to be able to make it, but is here. So I'm going to read this bio and then turn it over to David to read. I love this first sentence because this sentence is for all of us. David has been at SIU for a long time. Lord, I feel that. He's been a narrator and actor in various audio projects, written course material for the classics program. Frankly, I don't know how the classics program is going to do, they've been leaning on you pretty heavy, and occasionally writes things. His thesis is titled Fires of Rome, and his thesis advisor is Pinckney Benedict. So take it away, David.
Thank you, Allison. They do keep trying to get me to teach more after this, but I'm trying to be done soon. So what I want to do is sort of a tribute to the impact the program has had on me. I'm going to read a short snippet of my thesis novel, which is a historical fiction novel set in Nero's Rome, a little under 2,000 years ago. And is the sort of, that's my main focus in the area that I've been writing in for a long time. But then I want to read something that's a lot more personal, and it's a script for an audio piece. And that's the sort of thing that I was never able to do before I was in the program. I was never able to write about myself. So you'll sort of see both things. So first I'll start with a snippet from early in the book, which is a bit of backstory for one of the characters in Fires of Rome. Okay. Melos was in his 12th year when he watched his father's shop burn down. Even as a child, he'd understood the irony, for this shop sold magic. Each item on the shelves was made to appease jealous gods and vengeful spirits, to promote good fortune while chasing away bad. They sold little figurines to give shape to the household spirits of the Larium, perfumed oils for making libation to the gods, ornate knives for sacrifice, and wreaths of flowers to appease the dead. What they sold most often, however, were charms to protect against the evil eye. Like all children, Melis was taught to fear the evil eye. He learned very young to guard against the foul spirits that wandered the earth doing mischief. No one knew where they came from, though most people agreed the most sensible explanation was some woman opening a jar. Left alone, they were a nuisance, but their wrath could be focused if directed by the ill will of a mortal, which was never in short supply. Thus, whenever one man looked upon another with rage or envy in his heart, the evil eye appeared, and its gaze shone upon its victim like the full moon on a hunter's quarry. Some would go so far as to inscribe curses onto tablets of stone or clay, calling upon their chosen gods to bring pain and death to the one they hated. His father found this form of evocation most despicable of all, which is why he charged extra for the materials. The shop was located just off the main market street in the port town of Lilybaeum. It was not the biggest of Sicily's cities, nor the one with the most history, but when Melis was little, he thought it was the best place in the world. And as far as he could tell, the world seemed to agree. Travelers came from every place on the map or further, bartering with silks and oils and slaves that carried with them the thrill of far-off shores and just a whiff of camel. In return, the merchants of Sicily offered the rarest treasures in the empire. They boasted of fine Falernian wine and plates from Troy, goblets made gold by Midas's fingers, and jewels that had graced Cleopatra's ears. Melis had believed all these tall tales when he was young. He thought that the people who scoffed at Antinous the metalworker's genuine Corinthian bronze were just ignorant. Did they not realize that the color was supposed to rub off on your hands? Even when his neighbor tried to pass off a lopsided statue of Apollo as a genuine Praxiteles, he believed it. He thought perhaps the sixth finger was some sort of artistic signature. Who had a better life than a merchant? Who knew more, who saw more, who held more of the world without risking their hide upon the sea? Melis wanted to join them so bad his stomach ached, even after a full meal of coarse brown bread. He would lie awake at night in the loft above the shop where all his family slept, his father and mother and two little brothers, listening for the carts bringing in fresh supplies and wondering what treasures he might see in the morning, new and gleaming in dawn's light. Then he would fall asleep to the sound of braying donkeys and wheels grinding in the street, and dream of the day when the shop would be his. His father told him that if he wanted to take over the shop, he would need to learn to read and write so he could manage the ledger and sign for receipts. It took much searching for Melis to find the nearest literatus, for his school never stayed in one place for long. Neighbors would complain about the noise. Finally, he found his teacher in the alley between the bathhouse and the foolery, dirt on his clothes and straw in his hair, yet still carrying himself like a man of distinction. He had bright, angry eyes, graying hair splayed wild like a bramble brush, and a powerful nose. His name was Sostius, and he claimed he had been a private tutor to a prestigious Roman family before they had tossed him aside when their boys were grown. Before that, he had been a student in Athens, still the jewel of the world and the place of his birth. "I'm Greek too," said Melos. Sostius sniffed. "No, you come from a Greek family. There is a difference." "No, there's not," Melos protested. "Then what is it?" The tutor rolled his eyes. "There are 100 things. It is impossible to achieve a true Hellene's upbringing amidst the rabble of the empire. You do not even know the language of your fathers." "I do too," Melos said. "I'm speaking Greek right now." "You use a common Greek. I speak the pure Attic tongue that Demosthenes used to lash kings, that paved the stones of Plato's Republic and made the audiences of Sophocles weep. Melos stared at him in wide-eyed wonder, suitably awed in spite of, or perhaps because he could only understand every other word or so. When the tutor finished speaking, he tried to come up with a question that would show he was listening and would make for a good student. And so he said, "When that man put his tongue on those kings, were they angry or did they like it?" The tutor sighed. "I will answer all of your questions and more if you come back tomorrow and bring me payment." I'm going to stop there so I don't take too long. So that's the kind of thing I've been working on for a really long time. And then this is something I wrote just last Halloween for one of Pinckney's classes that I'm going to be turning into an audio piece soon. And again, this is a personal story that I was never able to write before I came to the program. I've been dreaming about a Ferris wheel lately. I see it standing in a cornfield that fills the horizon, surrounded by firm green stalks as tall as my shoulders. It's not too big, only about 2 stories tall, dwarfed by the grain silos in the distance. The corn stands still as the dusk sun bleeds into the western sky. There is no wind, but the Ferris wheel still spins gently with no one riding it. It has a star painted in red and green on the spokes, and flashing lights of gold all along the frame. Those colors often make me think of Christmas time, but I don't just have that dream around the holidays. It comes all around the year, when I'm stressed, when I'm sad. It's been that way for many years. I've had my palms read, I've had tarot cards arranged before me, and I've heard different things about the wheel. I've been told it's a symbol of innocence or restlessness or resistance to change. Now I can admit that I'm not too good with change, but I didn't need the wheel to tell me that. I think it means something else, if it means anything. When I was very young, my grandma pointed out her window and showed me the building where the Ferris wheels were made. I wasn't sure what she meant at first. You don't really think about where things come from when you're little. At least I didn't, and sometimes I still don't. But everything has to come from somewhere. She told me the story of a bridge company owned by a man named Sullivan, who'd been helping link the country together after the war between the states. When the World Expo came to Chicago, he made the long trip upstate and rode that first wheel that towered in the skyline, with cars so big they held 60 people apiece. Our man Sullivan fell in love with that wheel. He wanted everyone in the world to get a chance to ride it. But just a few years later, it was gone, dynamited into scrap metal. So he went to work on a rig of his own, found a partner in mechanics who showed him how to build a better wheel, one that could be raised and collapsed as needed, and small enough to be hauled all over the country. Then he came to our town and built a small factory, only able to work on one model at a time. It's still there, taking up about half a block by the railroad tracks, in the cheap part of town where the windows rattle when a train runs by. My grandmother lives just down the street in the house where my mother was born. And on summer evenings as the sun went down, her garden flowers were covered in its shadow. I picture that house and the sounds of the factory with no difficulty, right with the smell of the oven and the coarse fiber of the couch in the living room. It shook me when I heard they'd shut the factory down, one of the first casualties when quarantine began. I understood the decision, of course. What need could there be for carnival rides in that summer? But I could hardly imagine that neighborhood being quiet, not filled with the clanking and rattling when the frames were bolted together, the sputtering when an engine first went live, and the hiss of a welder's torch. I used to enjoy those sounds, but they'd make me impatient too, because I wanted the next rig to be finished. Because when a new Ferris wheel was finished, they'd roll it out into the yard and set it to running. and it'd go all night before they knew it was ready to go. You have to let it run that long to check if any of the lights go out, if the wiring is faulty, if the engine stutters. Those nights I would stay with my grandma and watch the lights play across her ceiling, flashing red and blue or green and gold. I'd fall asleep watching those lights, and if I had dreams back then, I don't remember them. But that was a long time ago. By the time I was in high school, I didn't care about the Ferris wheel. I felt I had to get out, get away from home as soon as I graduated. Just about everyone I knew felt like that, felt there was nothing around us worth staying for. So I ran off to college and didn't look back. And I loved it, I did, but I always tried to go back, at least for the holidays or at least on breaks, because if I stayed away for too long, I'd start to see the wheel spinning in the nighttime, calling me home. But this year my car broke down, and then the repairs broke something else, and then it sat for a month before I could afford to fix it. Before I knew it, I hadn't been home in a long time, and I was dreaming of the Ferris wheel every night. I started calling my family more often. It was good to hear from them, but most news wasn't great. People were getting sick, people were losing their jobs, people were hurting. My grandma, whose mind had already been slipping before the virus, was cooped up alone and getting worse. That's why I didn't believe her at first when she told me about the Ferris wheel. She said they'd opened the factory back up, that they'd already finished a new rig and it was spinning outside her window, that she saw those same old lights shining in her room. I couldn't believe it, but then I got a message from an old high school friend saying the same thing. Then another and another. Soon all my friends were back in town, sending me pictures. They were piling leaves above their heads and hanging lights for Halloween. They'd all come home to hunker down during the storm. I'm going home too. I can't stay away anymore. I don't care if there's no jobs, if there's nothing for me to do. I'll work at the Ferris wheel factory if that's all there is. At least then I'll be close. And besides that, I want to ask them a question, because my friend said the new Ferris wheel is running every night, and there's no reason they would do that. And I don't see any jobs at the factory in the paper. I don't see that they ever reopened at all. That's it.
Oh, that was so breathtaking. Thank you. We have been ruling the audio contest that the University of Missouri does through the Missouri Review, and I know that piece is going to win. It's both heartbreaking and heart-opening. I just love the image of the Ferris wheel. So we've come to the end of the program, but if you'll indulge me, I want to read a poem by my late husband, John Tribble. And many of you who are finishing up worked with John and loved him like I did. But I keep coming back to this particular poem because John had no way of knowing when he passed away in October of 2019 what the world was going to become. But this poem, which comes from his second book, And There Is Many a Good Thing, every time I read it, I feel like it's prophecy for what's happened to us since his passing. It's called Then, Now, and Later. And after I read it, I wish everybody a great night and thank you for making this virtual version of Gala so amazing. Maybe there'll be drunken dancing later at a later date. Then, Now, and Later by John Tribble. The life you lead is not the one you planned. The unexpected twists have only grown. Your destination changes as you go. So let the disappointment you feel show. No pains or sorrows need be met alone. The life you lead is not the one you planned. You'll be surprised when someone's outstretched hand will reach for you. Others can see and know the unexpected twists have only grown. The future's less a promise, more alone. Against the time you find your own command. Your destination changes as you go. Hold on to what you can. Let the rest flow like water slips to nothing in dry sand. The unexpected twists have only grown. The life you lead is not the one you planned. There is no roadmap for this shifting land. Love, hope, and loss can never be controlled. Your destination changes as you go. So my wish for you is lots of wonderful destinations. Don't forget us here back at SIU. One of my main projects before I retire from this institution is to make sure that the generations of MFA students know one another so that you know about Ruth Awad and Sequoia Nagamatsu and Melissa Scholes Young, because the people who have come out of this program are making waves in poetry and fiction and now in new media. We will rule. Thanks, everybody. Love you all.
Thank you, everyone. Love you too, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all are awesome. Thanks, Pinckney. Thanks, RA. Thanks, Judy.